My name is Amanda Panchukian. I live just north of Baltimore, Maryland. So I grew up around here. I got married to my husband it's 3 years this October, and we are in the midst of raising animals. We've got 2 cats and a dog, and my lovely stepdaughter who is actually going into high school this year. I was diagnosed with originally glioblastoma, which is a type of brain cancer, back January of this year, so January 2024, right at the end of the month. And it eventually made its way to, it was never fully confirmed that it was a glioblastoma. The more that my oncologist and the pathologist looked at my tumor, they couldn't confirm it for sure. So the exact, phrase, the exact diagnosis is an astrocytoma grade 4. I was having these odd sensations in my mouth and in my throat area. If you've ever had the candy Pop Rocks before, that's kind of what it felt like every day, all day. And I was like, oh, maybe I'm drinking too much wine, or maybe, you know what I mean? Like my diet's not great. So I was kind of keeping an eye on it, and the mouth sensations were really odd. It was almost like the sensation was to have too much saliva. Like it was like my mouth was trying to break down food for me before. It was odd, but it was, I guess, pronounced enough that I was noticing it. And then I just wave it off because it was so infrequent, right? So then the, holidays come around. Again, it's super infrequent. At this point, we've switched our primary care doctor. And I knew that I wanted to bring it up to him, but I just kind of wanted to get one because my husband and I are getting older, and I just wanted to make sure all of our T's were crossed, because my husband and I were going to plan to start trying this year for a baby. So just wanted everything taken care of. So we go and see my primary care doctor, and I say, these really odd things are happening to me. And at that point, I can't remember exactly the timeline. I think I just let him know about the odd sensations I was having, like kind of in my throat, in my mouth, that kind of area. And he was like, okay, well, let's get you set up for an MRI. I let him know, like, hey, I've been working out pretty profusely. Could it be, did I screw something up? Like, did I do something to my back? So we had like a nerve conduction thing. There was a couple different tests that I was set up for midway through January, or that I met him in January. And then in February, I had these tests set up, right? So then we had a massive snowstorm hit the Baltimore area. And that weekend, I started having numbing feeling in the right side of my face. It would start in my lips, and then it would slowly make its way up. And then my right hand started being impacted too at the same time. It almost felt like I was putting my finger into a electric socket. And then it just got to the point where I was at work one day. I had those episodes. They ended up being seizures. They're called focal seizures. I ended up having 5 in one school day. And one happened during an IEP meeting. And at that point, I wasn't actually presenting during that section of time. But if I was, then I likely wouldn't have been able to speak, because later on in the day, the last one, quote unquote, happened after I put the students on the bus. It started happening. I walked directly to our nurse's office, since she's right there in the front near the office doors. And I tried to tell her my hand is numbed up, my face is numbed up, but it came out as my hand is numbed up, like that, of some degree. And she thought I was having a stroke. So that night, my husband and I, we get in the car, I'm upset, and I had to I'm sitting there typing up sub plans on my phone, which is just goofy to think that I was so worried about that looking back now. And we went to the hospital. The hospital was jamming. It was very busy that night. I'm not a massive fan of the emergency room. No one is. And my husband and I were sitting there, we were watching The Walking Dead on our phones and laughing, and we ordered DoorDash, and we kind of just were thinking this is going to be silly, and they're so busy and whatever. And we go back, and this doctor asked me every question under the sun. And then he looked at my husband and said, have you seen her face start to droop? And I was like, face drooping? And my husband said no. And part of me was like, maybe fib a little bit, because I don't want to have sat here for 4.5 hours just to be told, maybe you should stop working so hard. You know what I mean? But this doctor, I can't remember his name now, but he listened to me thoroughly. I mean, his write-up was incredible. All the details he remembered. And he was just sitting there talking to me, and he had me do different, neurological tests at the time, which now I get all the time. And he was doing them to me, and I was passing them all. He was like, let's just put you through the CT scan, the CAT scan, right? I was like, okay, that's fine. So they roll me back, and I'm sitting there, I'm chatting with the nurse, just excited for a day off the next day, I think. And I'm not sure how many other people have dealt with this, but they get their results on their phone prior to talking to the doctor. And that's what happened to me. And it wrote on there, mass lesion found on the left side. It's pure panic. You're surrounded by all these people. You've got like one person vomiting and like over there. You got another person who like is clearly is some sort of intoxicated over there, and they're just like, and I'm sitting here reading this, and at that point it doesn't say anything about it. It just says what they found. So at that point, my husband calls my parents, and then things just moved really quickly after that. The doctor came over to me and said, we're going to move you because they didn't have a neurological unit there. They were going to move you from this hospital, which was directly affiliated with University of Maryland, which is where I got the remainder of my care. Neurosurgeon, they start talking about like what is going to be the first action, right? So the first action is to remove the tumor. Because of my tumor's location, it was about the size of a grape, like a green grape, And if you took my left eye and my left ear, and you went back and you went in and you met in the middle, wherever that is, that's about where the tumor was. So it was deep, and you don't just go in there and start like kind of squishing things around. You can't do that. So, 10 years ago, my tumor would have been completely inoperable, and they would have just gone on with standard of care of radiation and chemotherapy, and would have just hoped for the best. I enrolled in a trial, and I don't know the exact name of the trial, but I can at least explain it. The first part of the trial was the procedure. So the procedure that I had, well, I'm going to mess up the full name of it, but the acronym for it is called LITT, the LITT procedure, which always kind of made me laugh a little bit. The LITT, it stands for laser interstitial, and then something therapy, something targeted therapy or something like that. So basically, they did my biopsy that first round that I was in the hospital, right? And then they, sent it off to the pathologist. And at that point, they say it is cancer. It's nothing else that can invade the brain. There's, obviously some other nasty diseases that can be built there, but they know for sure that it's cancer. They do a full body scan on me. They can't find cancer anywhere else, so they know it's just in the brain. Fun fact about that too: if you have when you have brain cancer, if it starts there, it won't metastasize anywhere else because of something called the blood-brain barrier. It won't move. I don't know all the science behind it, but in a way, that's something that so many people fear so severely, is if it becomes so uncontained and uncontrolled that it metastasizes in other parts of your body. In a way, it kind of stays there, but the blood-brain barrier also makes it difficult for medication like my chemo. Thankfully, my specific chemotherapy can get through it, but most can't, right? Because your blood, they're like, oh, we can't have anything foreign come in here, right? So I have this treatment. I have the procedure done after the biopsy. I could take a couple of weeks off. I come home. I'm on these insane diets. I'm like, well, don't have any sugar. Of course, I'm I go overboard on anti-sugar, and I add we spend all this money on all these incredible diets, and I have no idea what I'm doing. You know what I mean? All I want is to try my best to help my stuff. You know what I mean? But because of the steroids, I was eating all the healthy things, but every single healthy thing in my house, because like if it wasn't nailed down to the table, I was eating it. So I was gaining a ton of weight, and the steroids made my face really like puffy and egg-like. I kind of looked like the, oh God, what is the egg on Humpty Dumpty. That's who I look like. Kind of look like Humpty Dumpty. Of course, it was in the, it was in the, like the winter time. So I was like extra pale. So nonetheless, I went in after a couple of weeks. They used that same biopsy hole, and I had like a very small scar from my biopsy space that went directly down to the tumor area. They used that same, I guess, travel channel to place this hot probe into the tumor, the laser, into the tumor to burn away the tumor. So that was that. That was the first part of the trial. The second part of the trial was radiation. Now, typically people with brain tumors, and I'm sure other tumors too. Again, I don't know a whole lot about the other stuff, but typically you do 30 days, right? 6 weeks for 5 days. Yeah. 6 weeks, 5 days of radiation. But with my specific trial, they wanted to see what the progress would be with the LITT treatment and followed up directly with 5 days of maximum proton therapy treatment. So you get your little face mask on, and it's interesting. I was in there from about, and what was helpful was the therapy center, the radiation therapy center was right around the corner from the hospital. So I went 5 days in a row, and I wasn't super impacted too bad with it all. I was just zapped, exhausted. And this entire time, I'm not back at work at all. I'm using up the hours and hours of sick time that I've built up over the years. I had like over like 800 hours or something crazy like that. So I'm just blowing through my hours, and they're just trying the best that they can over at work at that point. So that all happens. And then I take about a month off to work with Shady Grove, which is our main like fertility support facility, to do egg freezing, go through that process. So we do that. That's March. And then in April, I began the chemotherapy. So the trial was finished. The chemotherapy is not a part of the trial. So the chemotherapy is just kind of the follow-up standard of care. And the only other part of the trial is that I'm called by one of the trial nurses, trial researchers, every month or so, and they just basically ask me a handful of questions about my quality of life and my symptoms and stuff like that. And then they plop it all in a data chart, and there I am. So I'm about to come up on my 6th round of temozolomide. That's the specific chemotherapy I'm on. I thankfully don't have to go to the hospital to receive it or any other center to receive it. It is mailed directly to me or my pharmacy. I recently switched it to my pharmacy right around the corner. And it is pill form. It is in pill form. I'm on a pretty high dose, mainly, for a handful of different reasons. My oncologist could probably break it down, but I'm able to bounce back pretty quickly. And I've you just figure it out, like one round at a time, what the best way to be proactive about it is, what the best way to deal with things during it, and then the recovery period afterwards, which I find to be the most difficult. Like I was saying, 6th round coming up next week, and I'm taking a total of 12 altogether. So it is 5 nights out of a 28-day cycle. I take it. I asked my doctor, I said, why did this happen to me? And she asked me a couple of silly questions, like, did you live in this area? Did you live in this area? They have a high lead issue. And I'm like, no. And she was like, okay. She was like, even if you did, she was like, it's probably unlikely. She said, you were just really unlucky. And if you're someone who really overthinks things, you're going to dive into a hole with that. You were just unlucky, quote unquote. And that brings on a lot of mental support that you just need to be working through. And a lot of people can dive into some serious pits at that point. I know for me, I went through every stage of grief. I was so angry at first. I thought I thought things were being taken away from me, and it was so unfair. And I thought my life was just being cut short for no reason, because originally my prognosis was 13 to 18 months. We do all this planning as young people, and we want to do so much. You are obviously extremely passionate about this. Continue to be extremely passionate about children with special needs and people with special needs and their families. And you just drive with it, and almost in a way you look back and maybe you regret not, focusing on things that maybe you thought you were focusing on, but you really weren't. I've definitely done a lot of work with that myself. I think another big part is the access to fertility support. I know so many young women, right? Because, the social media is such a great way to be able to connect with people. I know a lot of young women who, have cancer of some kind, they don't have the same access. The only reason that I had access was because of the job that I had at the time. I don't really know the ins and outs, but if I didn't have the job at the time, if I wasn't employed in the county, it wouldn't have been, financially, we wouldn't have been able to make it work. You always hope going down the line that you can do it naturally because the medication's out of your system and you're healthy enough. And, my particular cancer, it's not curable. It's always going to be there. It can be stable for years and years and years, and even maybe look like it's gone, but it's always, you can never say that you're completely cured from it. So to sum all that up, the mental aspect of it and the idea that you had all these plans and things that you want to do, especially if you're, newly married or about to be married, or you're in a relationship and just trying to live your life. And that it's chucked in there and you have to reorder everything. If scans continue to show stability and that the cancer isn't coming back, then the only difference will be is that my scans will become less frequent throughout the year. So right now it's every 2 months after my treatment is technically finished. It's actually supposed to finish on Valentine's Day, which is super romantic and cute and fun as of right now. Hopefully it doesn't get pushed back, but if it does, it's fine. I'll just be seen via that MRI machine. And as I've asked her, I've said, what can we expect as far as, the fertility center and working with them? And once again, she just says, take it day by day. And I'm like, I can't do that. I can't, but I have to. I can't do that, but I have to. But yeah, I've said, what would happen if, in June something pops up? What would be the next? And she said, we'll work with it when it comes. And that is hard. So, you get to the point where you just kind of got to accept it in a way, and just kind of, for me, I give it over to God, and that's just what I believe in and what brings me a lot of peace. And I dove back into the working normal life, and I'm back to working out and doing normal things that bring me a lot of happiness. I know a lot of other people don't get the pleasure to be able to do that at all. I'm very, very, very lucky that I can return to a lot of my my old hobbies and my way of life to a degree, right? I can't go wild. I can't get on roller coasters and stuff like that. But, as far as limitations go, I don't have many. And I know I'm lucky in that way. So, continuing to kind of begin living my life again outside of cancer it's incredibly important, whatever that looks like. So that's helped me a lot. Even if things go downhill, even if treatment for whatever reason stops working, or for someone who's listening to this, their treatment isn't going great either, and they're continuing to try to figure things out, that either way, with being able to find this, you're given kind of a second chance. It's incredibly scary, but just look at it as kind of a new chance to, rebuild yourself and to work on those things that maybe you have pushed down in your heart. I know that I'm in therapy. I was never in therapy before, so that was really interesting going into that. Like we went down some weird roads, like talking about like my IBS problems and how I was worried about having to go to the bathroom on the way to my new job and like all like weird things that I pushed down so much. And I had so many fears and so many things I felt guilty about. And even if you don't have someone to talk to about that, you know what I mean? Even if it's a parent or a friend or anything like that, it's kind of a chance to bury some things in the healthy way. So that's what I would think of. Look at it as like a second chance to kind of reinvent yourself, your pre-cancer self, your post-cancer self. It's all the same person, but it kind of gives you a wake-up call.